If you want to know exactly how I train to build muscle efficiently and safely, today I'm going to walk you through my routine step by step. So if you are new here, welcome. I'm Faz, this is Fazlifts. I release educational content on building muscle and getting jacked twice a week. If that sounds good to you, hit subscribe. To my returning subscribers, I appreciate your support. Please like and comment below, it helps massively. And if you're interested in personalized coaching, there's a link in the description below, so get in touch, let's talk. Now, in terms of the top-down principles behind my routine, let's just talk about the things that people recognize, like volume and intensity and frequency. So my general preference is fairly moderate across the board. That's what works for me. So moderate frequency, 2 or 3 times a week per body part, 3 for upper and 2 for lower. I generally take my sets to about 0 RAR to failure. At the moment, I'm not leaving any reps in the tank. I don't really do an RAR approach or even my own enforced RAR. The reason being is more of a practical one. I currently train with 2 training partners, so there's 3 of us all together. So practically speaking, it just makes sense to train harder with a little bit less volume. This is one of those occasions where whatever you might think is optimal kind of goes to the side because there are other practical circumstances which get in the way. So I would rather have training partners because that, I believe, gives me quite a lot. It's good for me, it's good for training, it's good for the soul. And for me, progressive overload is still number 1. Okay, what I do is I lock in my form, my cadence, and any form particulars that I use, just to work around my own individual body or whatever. I lock that in and then I try and add load or reps every time I go to the gym. I don't always see progression, but when I do, it's very welcome. I train at a consistent level with consistent form and add reps as they come. I want to just spend a second talking about that because I think it's a bit of a misunderstood concept. To get more weight on the bar, you don't have to try harder than last time. That actually doesn't make any sense. You're not trying harder than last time. Your RAR should be set. Your routine, your volume should be set. Generally speaking, this is how the experience should go. Let's say you got 6 reps on your final set last week. Now this week, if you are feeling good and you're seeing some improvement, you're going to get to that 6th rep where you finished last time because you couldn't do any more. You can eke out 1 more. I know Greg Doucette has made a big deal about trying harder than last time, but that's fine advice for beginners and intermediates, but it's generally not great advice once you have your RAR and form and everything locked in, because I think that encourages you to do silly things like adjust your form, adjust your RAR, which has an impact. You shouldn't have to train harder to get an extra rep. It should happen as a result of your programming and the fact you already train at an appropriate level of effort. Do you see the difference? Yeah? Because if you're trying harder to get more reps, that's not progression. If I get 6 reps at 2 RAR and the week after I get 8 reps at 0 RAR, that's not improvement, is it? So you're not trying harder than last time. You have a consistent level of effort and go on from there. I just wanted to clarify that because it is a kind of a misunderstood point. I like the principle, don't get me wrong. Like the principle is nice, train harder, sure. But if you're exact about it, that's not really how it's done. Now, in terms of the sets and reps and the volume, generally speaking, I am quite flexible. So I will use about 2 sets at the moment, usually a top set, back off set, or 2 higher rep sets if it's in isolation. But I might vary that as well. Sometimes I might do 3 sets with 2 back offs or whatever, or 3 sets to cross, and sometimes I might do 1 set. I don't mind that because for me, I can still track my progression. Not something I talk about very much because I think it's one of those concepts which can dilute people's attention. But today, since we're talking about me, that's what I do. I will auto-regulate my volume on the session between 1 and 3 sets based on how I feel or how hard the sets were. And also I will use strategic selection of exercises to suit me as an individual. Things that I like to do, things which target my weaknesses, stuff like that. And I'll talk about that more over the course of the video. So a bit of an intro into what I do. Now let's talk about my exact workout split. So currently what I've been doing for the last 6 months or so, I've been using a upper lower, Sunday, Monday. Tuesday I take a day off. And then Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, towards the end of the week, I will do an upper, lower, upper. So I get 3 upper sessions and 2 lowers. For me, that's a good balance. Now, the upper sessions generally take on a very similar structure. I will do 1 normally compound push. Now, 2 of the sessions, it'll be a chest compound. 1 of the sessions, it'll be a shoulder compound. Now, so when I'm doing a so on the days when I do a chest compound, I generally do a shoulder isolation. That's how it works for me. I find for me, if I stack on a chest press and an overhead press, I do struggle with recovery with my shoulders and sometimes my elbows. So it's one of those where I've touched on this numerous times on my channel, and if you don't understand that, and you think an overhead press should be in there all the time. There are some groups who believe that. I think you maybe will understand that more as you get older or as you get more advanced and recovery becomes a concern. A side raise with a cable or a machine can work my shoulders just as well as an overhead press, but it doesn't give me the same level of elbow and shoulder stress. So I just match it up. I still do an overhead press, but on those days, I won't do a chest pushing compound. And next up, I do 2 upper body pulls, 1 vertical and 1 horizontal. So like a pull down or a pullover and a row. 1 will be in the sagittal plane and 1 will be in the frontal plane. Then I will finish off with a bicep isolation and a tricep isolation. So generally speaking, that's 6 exercises on the upper day from anywhere between 1 to 3 sets each. Okay, if it's 1 set, it's not necessarily going to be a shorter session because I'm probably going to spend more time between sets. It's one of those days where if all 3 of us are feeling particularly good, we might get amped up and just try for a little bit more. So on low days, what I start with is generally always a quad isolation and a hamstring isolation exercise. For hamstrings, I do both a seated and a lying. I think they both have value. And for quads, I generally just isolate with a leg extension. Now, after those 2 are over, I'm nice and warmed up, I'm ready to go. And then I will move towards a quad compound and a hamstring compound. So at the moment, my compounds are the pendulum squat and a leg press. And for my hamstrings, they are a weighted hyper and also a glute drive, which is a new one for me. I've probably only used the glute drive over the last maybe 5 or 6 years, but I do enjoy it. I think it's good. And then I finish off with calves and abs. So again, 6 exercises per day, kind of balance it out. Now I've touched briefly on sets, reps and rest periods, but I'll go into a bit more detail now. So set per exercise is usually anywhere between 1 to 3. If it's more typically, it's 2, a top set and a back off set. Or if it's an isolation exercise, 2 top sets. That works out pretty well for me. I just keep some of the stress off the joints. If I'm doing 3 sets, it's normally sets across. So my weekly volume total is not that high really. It could be as low as 3 or 4 on some weeks, or it could be 6 to 8, or maybe even sort of 16 to 18 in that range. My reps will generally be anywhere between as low as 8 and as high as 25. I don't particularly buy into this current fad of lower rep ranges being better all the time. I think generally speaking, the idea is sound, like generally 4 to 8 reps is going to lead to the best motor unit recruitment right from the start of the set. No arguments there, that's fine. What that argument misses though is the fact that neurologically speaking, the last 5 reps of an 8 rep set or a 6 rep set are exactly the same as the last 5 reps of a 15 rep set or a 20 rep set. Neurologically, you're getting the same stimulus, it's no different. So if you can use a lighter weight and protect your joints, that might be preferable. There are pros and cons. I still think there is value in low rep work. I did a video on reps recently and clearly I've talked about the value of low rep work because I think it has some value. I think it's good for some people to work on more strength ranges. They strengthen the joints, they strengthen the tendons. I think that's a good thing. But equally, you don't have to do everything in that range. You don't have to do your side laterals in that range. What's the point? I think that's a little bit silly, but it's a strong statement which gets a lot of people's attention on social media. I think generally the middle ground works out about right. So traditionally speaking, you're going to use low reps of compounds, high reps of isolations. I'm no different to you guys. That's what I do as well. And it's just a nice way to get the benefits of both. Nowadays, with my training age and the fact that I have done a lot of heavy work, I don't need tendon strengthening. I don't need joint strengthening. I'm a guy who's deadlifted 300 kilos. I don't need more strengthening, right? So I generally stick to reps in the 8 and higher range. And you will find that. You'll find guys with a strength background will generally stick to higher reps as they get older. Just makes sense. If you're starting lifting later in life, if you haven't had the experience of doing a lot of low rep work, you're probably going to be drawn to low reps. It makes sense, doesn't it? So this is how you make sense of just some of the clutter in social media. It's all very individual. And if you really explore it and you know what you're talking about, it does make sense. And in terms of rest periods, I'm looking at between 2 and 3 minutes. I think that's a good balance. My intensity is generally always 0 RIR, and sometimes I go to failure. I generally don't leave reps in the tank anymore. If I was training on my own and doing a bit more volume, then sure, I'd probably use an enforced RIR approach because I would get the benefits of the higher volume. So a lot of this is for practical purposes too. But again, today, since we're talking about me, that's what I do. Now, in terms of exercise selection and varieties, I like to cover all angles. I like to emphasize certain body parts. So For me, with my bodybuilding show in 2018, one of the bits of feedback from the judges was that my upper back was weaker relative to my lats. So one thing I've been doing a lot more of over the last 5-6 years or however long is just more rows in this range, more which slightly biases the upper back. This is actually a bit of a nice segue. People have asked me about the value of isolation exercises. This is the value. I generally think you should leverage mostly compounds, but if you need to add in volume to a certain area without there being excessive overlap into other areas, that is how you do it. It's a sensible way to add in volume. So on a chest pressing day, it's nice to get a bit of lateral delt work in with some side raises. It works well. I don't have to do another press. The press does work the side delts, but it also adds a ton of stress onto my shoulders and my elbows. Now, if you're young enough and weak enough, or you're doing a low volume routine, that's not going to make sense to you. And I have had some criticisms from notable power builders in the space who don't really understand that concept, but that reflects their training preferences because they are generally low volume advocates and they do bro splits. So just before I recap, in terms of managing recovery and joint health, I generally use pain as a guide. So if I see myself or one of my clients getting sore elbows, what that essentially means is their elbows aren't recovering from the total weekly volume or repetition range or exercise selection. So I will adjust something. If you use pain as a guide, you can quite intelligently match your programming to suit. If you're constantly dealing with elbow tendonitis, like rest assured, you don't have to deal with that, right? You can adjust the form on your exercises. You can adjust the volume of tricep focused exercises. I think the misunderstanding is people think they just have bad elbows, but it's actually a training issue. For tennis elbow, you're probably just a very tricep dominant lifter, and you've underestimated the role of your triceps in your total training. So as long as you understand tendonitis is usually a recovery issue, you can adjust your volume, your form, your repetition range, and your exercise selection to eliminate that. To me, that's pretty obvious, but for some guys, that's fairly high-level coaching stuff. Right, so I'll just do a quick recap, but if you have any other questions, pop them down. Maybe something I haven't covered and you want to know, by all means, pop them down and I'll get around to it. So in general, I'm fairly moderate across the board, moderate volume, moderate frequency, reasonably high intensity. I don't try and go to failure all the time or try and do force reps or whatever, or extend the set. I have very strategic exercise selection and I'm very flexible with my volume. That's in an auto-regulated way. And I will aim to progress in a very joint-friendly way because I think that's the advantage of bodybuilding as opposed to powerlifting. If you are just a casual lifter who wants to get stronger, there's no point locking yourself in to specific lifts. Be a bodybuilder. If you just want to look good and be strong, then be a bodybuilder. Right, guys, so you can take some of those principles and apply them to your own training to build muscle efficiently, but also safely. That's the key. Subscribe for more clear and practical advice. And if you want tailored guidance, check out my coaching link in the description. Right, guys, take it easy.